Jake Matthews wiped the frost from his helmet visor and checked his watch. 3 more hours until he could head back to the warmth of Station 7. The wind on Kepler 442b never stopped howling, and today it cut through his thermal suit like ice knives. He had been working on this frozen moon for 8 months now, maintaining the big machines that slowly changed the air to make it breathable for humans. Most people thought he was crazy for taking this job. Station 7 sat alone in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but ice, rocks, and the strange purple sky of this distant world. The main human colony was 200 miles away, and Jake often went weeks without seeing another person. But he liked the quiet. He liked fixing things. And the pay was good enough to set him up for life when his contract ended. The atmospheric processor hummed behind him as he finished checking the fuel lines. These massive machines were slowly warming the planet, but it would take decades before humans could walk outside without suits. The native animals had adapted to the cold over millions of years. Humans were just visitors here, trying to make the place more like home. Jake had seen the local wildlife before. Large creatures that looked like crosses between wolves and bears roamed the frozen plains in packs. The scientists called them Therians. They were smart animals, much smarter than regular wolves back on Earth. Sometimes Jake would see them watching him from a distance as he worked. They never came close, just observed with their bright yellow eyes before disappearing into the ice storms. As Jake packed up his tools, something caught his eye. A dark shape was moving across the white landscape, heading straight for his station. He squinted through the swirling snow and felt his heart skip. It was a Therian, but this one was huge, much larger than any he had seen before. And it was not running away like they usually did. The creature moved slowly, struggling through the deep snow. As it got closer, Jake could see it was carrying something in its mouth. 3 small shapes that hung limp and still. The Therian was a female, and those were her babies. Jake backed toward the station door, his hand moving to the emergency beacon on his belt. Therians had never attacked humans, but they were still wild animals. This one was as big as a small horse, with thick, gray fur and teeth that could crush bones. But something made him stop, the way she moved. She was not hunting. She was not being aggressive. She looked desperate. The mother Therian reached the edge of Jake's work area and stopped. She looked at him with those bright yellow eyes, and Jake saw something there that made his chest tight. Intelligence, pleading, hope. This was not just an animal acting on instinct. This was a mother who needed help. Slowly, carefully, the Therian lowered her head and placed the 3 small bodies on the ground in front of Jake. The pups were barely moving, their tiny chests rising and falling so slowly that Jake thought they might already be dead. Their fur was covered with ice crystals, and their little bodies were stiff with cold. The mother stepped back and sat down in the snow. She did not leave. She did not pick up her babies and run. She just sat there, looking at Jake with eyes that seemed to say everything without words. Help them, please. I cannot do this alone. Jake felt his training kick in. He had basic medical knowledge, enough to handle emergencies until help could arrive from the main colony. These pups were dying from exposure to the cold. Their body temperature was too low, and they needed warmth fast. Okay, big girl, Jake said softly, keeping his voice calm even though his heart was racing. I understand. Let me help. He moved slowly toward the pups, watching the mother Therian carefully. She could kill him with one swipe of her massive paws, but she just watched as he knelt down and gently picked up the first pup. It was so cold that its fur felt like ice against his gloves. The tiny creature did not even respond to being touched. The mother made a soft sound, almost like a whimper. Jake looked at her and nodded. I know, they are very sick, but I am going to try to help them. Jake carried the first pup toward the station entrance. The mother Therian stood up, and for a moment, Jake thought she might attack. But she just followed at a distance, her yellow eyes never leaving her baby. Inside the station, Jake quickly set up an emergency warming station. He used heating pads, thermal blankets, and a small space heater to create a warm area on his work table. The first pup was so still that Jake feared it was too late. But as he wrapped it in warm blankets and began to gently massage its tiny body, he felt a faint heartbeat. "Come on, little one," he whispered. "Stay with me." One by one, Jake brought the other two pups inside. The mother Therian positioned herself right outside the station door, lying down in the snow like a giant guardian. She could see through the windows, watching every move Jake made with her baby's dot. As the hours passed, Jake worked without stopping. He warmed the pups slowly, knowing that heating them too fast could kill them. He gave them tiny drops of warm water and checked their breathing every few minutes. The station's heater worked overtime, filling the small space with blessed warmth. The largest pup was the first to show real signs of life. Its eyes opened, bright blue like chips of ice, and it made a tiny sound that was somewhere between a bark and a mew. Jake felt tears in his eyes as the little creature began to move its legs. Outside, the mother heard her baby's cry. She stood up and pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The sound she made was pure relief and joy. One by one, the other pups began to recover. They were weak and tired, but they were alive. Jake made a soft bed for them near the heater and watched as they huddled together, their small bodies finally warm and safe. The mother Therian never left her post outside the door. Even when the wind picked up and snow began to fall harder, she stayed, watching, waiting, trusting this strange human with the most precious things in her world. Jake had not slept in 18 hours. Every time he started to close his eyes, one of the pups would make a sound, and he would jump up to check on them. The mother Therian outside had not moved either. She lay in the snow like a statue, her yellow eyes always watching through the window. The smallest pup was still struggling. While his two brothers were getting stronger and starting to crawl around their warm bed, the little one just lay still. Jake had been giving him drops of warm milk every hour, but the pup barely swallowed. His breathing was too fast, and shallow Jake knelt beside the makeshift bed and gently picked up the smallest pup. The tiny creature felt so fragile in his hands, like a bird with broken wings. Outside, the mother Therian saw what he was doing and stood up. She pressed her nose to the glass and made a low sound that Jake had never heard before. It was not a growl or a bark. It sounded almost like singing, but sad. "I know, Mama," Jake said softly. "He is the sick one, but I am not giving up on him." Jake held the pup against his chest, letting his body heat warm the small creature. He had read somewhere that skin contact could help sick animals, something about the heartbeat being comforting. It seemed crazy, but he was running out of ideas. The pup's breathing slowed down a little. Jake felt a tiny tongue lick his finger, so light he almost missed it. Then the pup made a small sound, barely a whisper, but it was the first real sign of life Jake had seen from him. Outside, the mother Therian heard her baby's voice. She stood up and walked to the door of the station. She did not try to break in or scratch at the metal. She just sat down and waited, like she was asking permission to come inside. Jake looked at the door, then at the pups, then back at their mother. This was completely against every safety rule he had ever learned. Therians were wild animals. They were strong enough to tear a human apart. But this one had brought her babies to him for help. She had trusted him with the most important things in her life. Slowly, Jake walked to the door. The mother Therian did not move as he reached for the handle. She just watched him with those intelligent eyes, waiting to see what he would do. "Okay, big girl," Jake said, "but we do this slow and easy. No sudden moves. Your babies need quiet to get better." Jake opened the door just a crack. Cold air rushed in, making the heater work harder. The mother Therian looked at the opening, then at Jake, then at her babies on the warm bed. She made a soft sound, almost like she was asking a question. "Yes, you can come in," Jake said, "but just inside the door. We need to keep it warm in here." The mother Therian moved like she was walking on ice. Every step was careful and controlled. She was so big that she had to duck her head to fit through. The doorway. Once inside, she lay down near the door, making herself as small as possible. She was still huge, taking up a quarter of the small station, but she tried to stay out of Jake's way. From her new position, she could see her babies clearly. The two healthy pups saw their mother and made excited sounds. They tried to crawl toward her, but they were still too weak to move very far. The mother made gentle sounds back to them, a conversation that Jake could not understand, but could feel was full of love. The sick pup in Jake's arms heard his mother's voice and turned, his head toward the sound. His blue eyes opened wider than they had since Jake found them, and he made a tiny cry. It was weak, but it was real. "See that, Mama?" Jake said to the mother Therian. "He knows you are here. That is going to help him get better." Over the next few hours, something amazing happened. The mother Therian began to help Jake take care of her babies. When Jake went to get warm milk for the pups, she would gently nudge the healthy ones back toward their bed if they tried to wander too far. When Jake was feeding the sick pup, she would watch carefully and make soft, encouraging sounds. Jake realized that she was learning from him. She watched how he held the pups, how he fed them, how he checked their breathing. When he showed her how to touch the sick pup's chest to feel his heartbeat, she understood immediately. She placed one huge paw very gently on her baby's side and listened with her head tilted. The communication between them grew stronger as the hours passed. Jake learned that a low rumble meant she was happy with what he was doing. A sharper sound meant she was worried. When she looked toward the window and made a questioning sound, Jake knew she was asking about the weather outside. "Still snowing," Jake would tell her. "But we are safe in here." The sick pup was getting stronger. Jake could feel it in the way the tiny body responded to touch, in the way his breathing was becoming more normal. By the second day, the little one was drinking milk on his own and even trying to crawl like his brothers. Jake made a discovery that surprised him. The mother Therian could count. When all three pups were sleeping together in a pile, she was calm. But if one of them crawled away from the others, she would look at Jake and make a sound until he brought the lost baby back to the group. She knew exactly how many babies she had, and she wanted them all together. She also began to show Jake things. When he was preparing food for the pups, she would sniff the milk and make different sounds. Jake realized she was telling him whether it was the right temperature. Too hot, and she would pull her head back and make a sharp sound. Just right, and she would make that low rumble of approval. The mother Therian even learned to help with feeding time. Jake showed her how to hold a bottle steady while a pup drank. Her huge paws were surprisingly gentle as she helped support her babies during their meals. On the third night, Jake woke up to find all three pups sleeping in a warm pile against their mother's fur. She had somehow moved them from their bed to her side without waking Jake up. The little family looked peaceful and content, and for the first time since this all started, Jake felt like everything was going to be okay. The sick pup was the smallest of the three, but he was also the most curious. Jake started calling him Scout because he was always trying to explore new places. The other two he named Frost and Ember because of their different colored fur patterns. The mother Therian seemed to understand that these were names. When Jake said Scout, she would look at the smallest pup. When he said Frost or Ember, her eyes would move to the right babies. She was learning human words, just like her pups were learning to trust human hands. By the end of the first week, Jake knew he had to tell someone about what was happening at Station 7. The 3 pups were healthy and playful now, tumbling around the warm station like puppies. Their mother, who Jake had started calling Luna, because of her silver-gray fur, had become his partner in caring for them. But Luna was showing behaviors that Jake had never seen in any animal before. She was not just smart. She was trying to communicate complex ideas. Jake set up his video camera to record Luna's actions. He wanted proof of what he was seeing, because he knew no one would believe him otherwise. The footage he captured over. The next few days changed everything he thought he knew about the Therians. Luna had learned to operate simple switches. She could turn the lights on and off by pressing the control panel with her nose. She understood that the red light on the heater meant it was working, and the green light meant it needed fuel. When Jake was busy with other work, Luna would watch the heater and make a specific sound when the light changed colors. The pups were learning too. Scout, the smallest one, had figured out how to open the food containers. Frost could stack the empty bottles in neat piles. Ember had learned to bring Jake his tools when he was working on equipment. They were not just copying what they saw. They were understanding the purpose behind the actions. But the most amazing thing was what happened when Jake tried to leave the station for routine maintenance work. Luna would position herself between Jake and the door, making urgent sounds. When Jake ignored her and went outside anyway, she would pace by the windows, clearly distressed. It took Jake several tries to understand what she was trying to tell him. Luna could predict the weather. She would become restless hours before storms hit. She would lead Jake to the windows and point her nose toward specific areas of the sky. Every time she did this, bad weather would arrive within a few hours. Jake started to trust her warnings and would postpone his outside work when Luna showed signs of worry. Jake called Dr. Amy Sullivan at the main colony. Amy was the head of xenobiology, the scientist who studied alien life forms. Jake had met her a few times during his orientation, and he knew she would be interested in what he had discovered. "Jake, slow down," Amy said when he called her on. "The emergency communication system. You are telling me that a Therian is living in your station?" "Not just living here," Jake said. "She is helping me. She is learning. Amy, these animals are much smarter than we thought. I have video proof." Amy was quiet for a long moment. "Send me the footage," she finally said. "All of it? And Jake, do not let that animal leave before I can get there. If what you are saying is true, this could change everything we know about this planet." Jake sent hours of video to the main colony. He showed Luna helping to feed the pups, operating simple controls, and predicting weather changes. He showed the pups working together to solve problems and responding to their names. The footage was clear and undeniable. Amy called back within 2 hours. "I am coming to your station," she said. "I am bringing Ben Carter, our language specialist, and Lisa Park, our veterinarian. We will be there tomorrow." Jake was nervous about other people meeting Luna. She had learned to trust him, but he did not know how she would react to strangers. He spent the evening talking to her, trying to prepare her for visitors. "Tomorrow, some friends are coming to see you," Jake told Luna as she lay with her pups near the heater. "They are good people. They want to learn about you and your babies." Luna tilted her head when Jake spoke to her. She had learned to recognize many human words, and Jake was sure she understood more than she could show. She made a questioning sound and looked toward the door. "Yes, they will come through the door," Jake said. "But they will be careful, like I was careful with your babies." The next day, Jake heard the sound of snow vehicles approaching the station. Luna heard them too. She stood up and moved protectively in front of her pups, but she did not seem afraid. She just watched the door and waited. Amy Sullivan was a small woman with sharp eyes and quick movements. Ben Carter was tall and quiet, with recording equipment hanging from his shoulders. Lisa Park carried a medical bag and moved with the calm confidence of someone who worked with animals every day. They all stopped in the doorway when they saw Luna. She was enormous inside the small station, her yellow eyes fixed on the strangers. The 3 pups were behind her, peering around their mother's legs with curiosity. "Incredible," Amy whispered. "Jake, she is beautiful." Luna seemed to understand that these humans were not a threat. She made a soft sound and stepped to the side, allowing them to see her babies. Scout, the boldest of the 3, actually walked toward the visitors with his tail wagging. "They are so young," Lisa said. "How long have you been caring for them?" 10 days, Jake replied. "But Luna has been doing most of the work. I just helped get them warm and healthy." Ben Carter set up his recording equipment and began documenting the sounds Luna made. Within an hour, he had identified over 20 different vocalizations that Luna used consistently. She had different sounds for food, danger, comfort, and questions. She was not just making random animal noises. She was using a language. "This is remarkable," Ben said. "She has grammar. She combines sounds to make new meanings. When she wants food for the pups, she uses one sound. When she wants food for herself, she uses a different combination." Amy was fascinated by Luna's problem-solving abilities. She brought simple puzzles and tests from the colony. Luna solved them faster than most Earth animals could. But more importantly, she taught her solutions to her pups. Knowledge was being passed from mother to children, just like in human families. "Jake, do you realize what you have discovered?" Amy said, "These are not just intelligent animals. They have culture. They have language. They have technology, even if it is simple technology." Lisa Park made another discovery while examining the pups. "These babies are healthier than they should be," she said. "Look at their muscle development, their coordination. They are learning faster than normal because they are being raised by both their mother and a human. They are getting the benefits of both species." Over the next 3 days, the team documented everything they could about Luna and her pups. They recorded her sounds, tested her intelligence, and observed her interactions with Jake. Every test confirmed what Jake had suspected. The Therians were not just smart animals. They were people, just different from humans. On the last day of their visit, something happened that proved Luna's intelligence beyond any doubt. She led the entire group outside the station to a spot about half a mile away. There, buried under the snow, they found the remains of Luna's original pack. She had brought them to show them where her family had died and to help them understand why she had come to Jake for help. Luna was not just an animal acting on instinct. She was a person who had lost everything and made a desperate choice too. Trust strangers in order to save her children. And that choice had created something new on this frozen world, something that had never existed before. Friendship between 2 intelligent species. 3 weeks after the scientists left, Luna began showing new behaviors that surprised Jake even more. She would stand at the windows for long periods, looking out at the frozen landscape and making soft calling sounds. At first, Jake thought she was lonely for her own kind, but then he realized she was calling to someone. Other Therians started appearing near the station. They stayed far away at first, just dark shapes moving across the white snow. But each day they came a little closer. Luna would go outside and meet with them, making the complex sounds that Ben Carter had identified as language. Then she would come back inside and continue caring for her pups. Jake started to understand what was happening. Luna was telling other Therians about the humans. She was sharing her experience with them, explaining how Jake had saved her babies. Word was spreading through the Therian community about the strange partnership at Station 7, the first Therian. To approach the station was an old male with scars across his face and a limp in his back leg. Luna went outside to meet him, and Jake watched through the window as they had a long conversation. The old male kept looking toward the station, and Jake could see intelligence in his yellow eyes, just like in Luna's. When Luna came back inside, she was excited. She paced around the station, making urgent sounds and looking at Jake. She was trying to tell him something important, but Jake could not understand what she wanted. The next morning, Jake found out. The old male Therian was lying in the snow near the station entrance, but he was not moving. Jake went outside carefully and saw that the old Therian was sick. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes were dull with fever. Luna came out and stood beside Jake. She looked at the sick Therian, then at Jake, then back at the Therian. Her meaning was clear. "This is my friend. Can you help him too?" Jake had never treated a full-grown Therian before, but he knew the basics of animal medicine from his emergency training. The old male was suffering from an infection in his injured leg. Without treatment, he would die. "Okay, Luna," Jake said, "but he is too big to bring inside. We will have to treat him out here." Jake set up a temporary shelter using tarps and heat lamps. The old Therian, who Jake started calling Scar because of his facial marks, was too weak to resist treatment. Jake cleaned his infected wound and gave him antibiotics from the station's medical supplies. Luna stayed with Scar the entire time, making comforting sounds and keeping him calm. Over the next few days, more Therians arrived. Some were healthy and just curious about the humans. Others needed help. There was a female with a broken paw, a young male who had eaten something poisonous, and a mother with 2 cubs who were too thin from hunger. Jake realized that Luna had become a bridge between 2 worlds. She was bringing her people to the humans for help, and she was teaching them that not all aliens were dangerous. Each Therian that Jake helped went back to their community and shared the story. The word spread further and further across the frozen landscape. Dr. Amy Sullivan returned with a larger team when Jake reported what was happening. She brought medical supplies, translation equipment, and recording devices. What she found amazed everyone at the main colony. "Jake, you have started something incredible here," Amy said as she watched Jake treat a Therian with a hurt eye. "These animals are forming a medical relationship with humans. They are seeking us out for help." Ben Carter was fascinated by the language exchanges he was observing. The Therians had developed specific sounds for different types of human help. They had words for medicine, food, warm, and safe. They were creating a cross-species vocabulary. "This is not just communication," Ben said. "This is cultural exchange. They are adapting their language to include human concepts, and we are learning to understand their ways of thinking." Lisa Park made another important discovery. The Therians were not just coming for emergency medical help. They were bringing Jake information about the planet that humans had never learned. They showed him which plants were safe to eat, where to find fresh water under the ice, and how to predict the severe weather patterns that made this world so dangerous. "They are teaching us how to survive here," Lisa said. "The Therians have lived on this planet for thousands of years. They know things about it that our best scientists have not figured out." The 3 pups were growing fast and becoming more amazing each day. Scout, Frost, and Ember were learning from both their mother and the humans around them. They could understand simple commands in both human speech and Therian language. They were becoming true citizens of both worlds. Scout was the most adventurous. He would follow Jake outside when he worked on equipment, learning to recognize different tools and their purposes. Frost was the smartest problem solver. She could figure out how to open containers, operate simple switches, and even help Jake with basic repairs. Ember was the most social. He was always the first to greet new Therians when they arrived, and he seemed to understand how to make both humans and Therians feel comfortable together. Jake started keeping detailed records of every Therian interaction. He documented their different sounds, their social behaviors, and their individual personalities. What he discovered was that each Therian had a unique way of communicating. Just like humans had different voices and speaking styles, the Therians also began bringing gifts to Jake and the human team. They would leave interesting stones, pieces of unusual ice formations, and even small carved objects near the station. Jake realized that these gifts had meaning in Therian culture. They were tokens of friendship and gratitude. One day, Luna brought something that made Jake understand just how intelligent her species really was. It was a piece of metal, clearly manufactured, but not by humans. The metal had strange symbols carved into it, symbols that looked like writing. "Amy, you need to see this," Jake called over the radio. "Luna just brought me something that looks like Therian writing." When Amy examined the metal piece, she was speechless. The symbols were organized in patterns that suggested a written language. The Therians did not just have spoken communication. They had developed writing, just like humans had thousands of years ago. "Jake, do you understand what this means?" Amy said, "This is not just an intelligent species. This is a civilization. The Therians have technology, art, written language, and complex social structures. They are not animals. They are people. The discovery changed everything." The human colonial government had to be notified. Scientists from Earth would want to study this new civilization. But most importantly, humans could no longer think of Kepler 442b as an empty world waiting to be colonized. It was already home to an intelligent species that had been trying to communicate with the newcomers all along. Luna seemed to understand the importance of what was happening. She spent more time teaching her pups about both human and Therian ways. She was preparing them for a future where both species would need to live and work together on this frozen world. The weather scanner in Jake's station had been showing red warnings for 3 days. A massive storm system was approaching Kepler 442b, bigger than anything Jake had seen since arriving on the planet. The winds would reach deadly speeds, and the temperature would drop so low that even the Therians would struggle to survive. But Luna was acting strange in a way that worried Jake more than any weather report. She paced constantly, making urgent sounds that Jake had never heard before. She would run to the windows, look out at the sky, then run back to her pups and gather them close. Her behavior was not just concern about bad weather. This was pure terror. Scout, Frost, and Ember picked up on their mother's fear. The 3 young Therians stayed close to Luna, making soft, whimpering sounds. They were now almost full-grown, but they still looked to their mother for guidance. And their mother was telling them that something terrible was coming. "What is it, Luna?" Jake asked. "What do you see out there that I am missing?" Luna came to Jake and pressed her large head against his chest. She made a complex series of sounds, the kind Ben Carter had identified as urgent communication. Then she ran to the window and used her nose to point toward the eastern mountains. Jake looked where Luna was pointing, but saw only the usual gray clouds gathering for the storm. He checked his weather instruments again. Everything showed a severe storm approaching, but nothing that the station could not handle. The building was designed to survive the worst weather this planet could produce. Luna became more agitated as the day went on. She would not eat, and she refused to let her pups wander far from her side. As evening approached, she did something that shocked Jake. She went to the door and began scratching at it, making loud calling sounds toward the outside. Within an hour, Therians began appearing from all directions. Not just a few, but dozens of them. They moved across the snowy landscape in long lines, all heading toward the station. Jake had never seen so many Therians in one place before. Scar, the old male Jake had treated weeks earlier, was leading one of the groups. He came straight to the station and began making the urgent sounds that Jake now recognized as Therian language. Luna ran outside to meet him, and they had a rapid conversation, filled with gestures and complex vocalizations. When Luna came back inside, she was even more upset. She ran to Jake and began nudging him toward his equipment locker. She knew where he kept his emergency gear, and she was trying to tell him to get ready for something. Jake called Dr. Amy Sullivan at the main colony. "Amy, something is happening. Here, Luna is acting like the world is about to end, and there are Therians everywhere. More than I have ever seen." "Jake, we are tracking that storm system too," Amy replied. "It is going to be bad, but your station should be fine. Just stay inside and wait it out." "I do not think Luna is worried about the station," Jake said. "I think she is trying to warn me about something else." Jake decided to trust Luna's instincts. He gathered his emergency supplies and prepared for the worst. Outside, more Therians continued to arrive. By nightfall, there were over 100 of them gathered around the station. They were organized into family groups, with adults protecting the young ones. That night, Jake barely slept. Luna and her pups stayed close to him, and every few hours Luna would go to the windows and make worried sounds. The storm was still hours away, but Jake could feel electricity in the air that made his skin tingle. At dawn, Jake understood what Luna had been trying to tell him. The problem was not the storm itself. The problem was where the Therians had been taking shelter. Scar led Jake and Luna to a ridge about 2 miles from the station. There, hidden in the mountainside, was the entrance to a massive cave system. Hundreds of Therians lived in these caves during the worst weather. It was their traditional shelter, passed down through generations. But Jake's engineering training told him immediately that the caves were a death trap. The rock formations were unstable. The kind of pressure changes that came with severe storms could cause the entire system to collapse. The Therians did not have the technical knowledge to recognize the geological danger, but Luna had somehow understood that they needed human help. "Amy, I need to speak to the colony administrator right now," Jake said over his radio. "We have an emergency situation here." Administrator Robert Hayes was a practical man who cared more about mining quotas than scientific discoveries. "When?" Jake tried to explain the situation. Hayes was not interested in helping. "Matthews, your job is to maintain the atmospheric processors, not to play with the local wildlife," Hayes said. "We are not risking human lives and expensive equipment to rescue a bunch of animals." "These are not animals," Jake said. "They are intelligent people, and they are going to die if we do not help them." "That is not our problem," Hayes replied. "Stay at your station and do your job." Jake looked at Luna, who was watching him with those intelligent yellow eyes. She could not understand the words, but she could sense his frustration. More Therians were arriving at the caves every hour, seeking shelter before the storm hit. They trusted their traditional refuge. Not knowing it had become dangerous, Jake made a decision that could end his career and possibly his life. He was going to help the Therians with or without official permission. "Luna, I need you to do something very important," Jake said. "You need to convince your people to leave the caves. All of them. They are not safe." Luna tilted her head, listening carefully. Jake took her to his geological scanner and showed her the readings. He pointed to the red danger signals and made the universal gesture for bad that Luna had learned. Then he pointed toward the caves and shook his head. Luna understood. She ran toward the caves, calling to other Therians in urgent tones. Within minutes, Jake could hear a complex conversation happening in Therian language. Voices rose and fell as Luna tried to convince her people to abandon their ancestral shelter. But changing the minds of hundreds of Therians would not be easy. They had used these caves for generations. Their grandparents had survived storms in these caves. Why should they trust the strange humans' warning over their own traditions? Scout, Frost, and Ember became crucial in the persuasion effort. As the first Therians to grow up trusting humans, they could bridge the gap between their mother's urgent warnings and their people's natural caution. They ran between different family groups, adding their voices to Luna's pleas. Time was running out. The storm would hit in less than 12 hours. Jake knew that if the Therians were going to survive, he would need to provide them with alternative shelter. But housing hundreds of large creatures in sub-zero temperatures would require resources that the colony administration had forbidden him to use. Jake looked at his 3 young friends and their desperate mother. He thought about Scar and all the other Therians who had trusted him with their lives. Then he made the choice that would define the rest of his time on Kepler-442b. He was going to save them all, even if it cost him everything. Jake worked faster than he had ever worked in his life. He had 8 hours before the storm hit, and hundreds of Therians who needed shelter. The colony administration had refused to help, but Jake was not giving up. He had an idea that might save everyone, but it would require breaking every safety rule he had ever learned. The atmospheric processors around his station generated massive amounts of heat as they worked to change the planet's air. Jake realized he could create temporary heated shelters by redirecting that thermal energy. It would be dangerous and probably destroy the expensive equipment, but it was the only way to keep the Therians alive. Luna seemed to understand that. Jake was trying to help. She organized her people into groups and kept them calm while Jake worked. Scout, Frost, and Ember helped by carrying tools and supplies between the different work areas. The 3 young Therians had become Jake's assistants. Understanding his needs sometimes before he spoke them, Jake called Dr. Amy Sullivan on his emergency radio. "Amy, I need your help. I am going to try to save the Therians, but I cannot do it alone." "Jake, Hayes will fire you if you damage the processors," Amy warned. "Those machines cost millions of dollars." "Then help me save lives and worry about the money later," Jake replied. "These people trust us. I will not let them down." Amy arrived with Ben Carter and Lisa Park within 2 hours. They brought medical supplies, emergency equipment, and most importantly, they brought faith in what Jake was doing. When Ben saw the hundreds of Therians working together to prepare for the storm, he was amazed. "They are organized like a small city," Ben said. "Look how they are taking care of their young and elderly. This is not just animal behavior. This is civilization." Jake's plan was simple but risky. He would use the heat from 3 atmospheric processors to warm large areas where the Therians could take shelter. Heavy tarps and emergency shelters would keep the wind out. Portable heaters powered by the station's generator would provide extra warmth. But the plan required the Therians to trust human technology completely. They had to give up their traditional caves and put their lives in the hands of strange machines they did not understand. Luna became the key to making it work. She walked among her people, explaining Jake's plan in their complex language. She showed them how the heaters worked, demonstrated that the shelters were strong, and used her own trust in Jake to convince others. The old male Scar was the first to openly support Luna's position. He gathered the elder Therians and spoke to them in the deep, rumbling tones that Ben identified as formal speech. Whatever Scar said, it carried weight. One by one, the family groups began moving toward Jake's makeshift shelters. As the storm clouds grew darker, Jake made a final check of his emergency shelters. He had created 5 large heated areas that could hold all the Therians. Each shelter had backup power emergency food supplies, and medical equipment. It was not perfect, but it would keep everyone alive. The storm hit with a fury that shook the ground. Winds howled at over 100 miles per hour, and the temperature dropped so fast that moisture in the air turned to ice crystals. Inside the shelters, humans and Therians huddled together, sharing warmth and waiting for the danger to pass. Jake stayed in the largest shelter with Luna and her family. Scout curled up next to Jake, sharing body heat. Frost and Ember helped. Lisa parked check on elderly Therians who were struggling with the cold. The young Therians moved easily between human and Therian groups, making sure everyone was comfortable. 6 hours into the storm, Jake's worst fears came true. His scanner detected massive geological activity in the mountain where the traditional caves were located. The pressure changes from the storm were causing exactly what he had predicted. The entire cave system collapsed with a rumble that could be heard even over the howling wind. Luna heard the sound and knew what it meant. She looked at Jake with eyes full of gratitude and made a sound that needed no translation. "Thank you. You saved us all." The storm lasted 18 hours. When it finally passed, Jake and the Therians emerged to find a changed landscape. The mountains had new shapes where the caves had collapsed. Snowdrifts were piled as high as buildings. But everyone was alive and unharmed. The rescue operation became the talk of the entire human colony. Administrator Hayes was angry about the damaged equipment, but he could not argue with the results. Jake had prevented a disaster that would have killed hundreds of intelligent beings. The story reached Earth, where it became front-page news. Humans across the galaxy were inspired by the cooperation between species. More importantly, the crisis had changed the relationship between humans and Therians forever. The Therians now understood that humans could be trusted partners, not just strange visitors. They began sharing more of their knowledge about the planet, teaching humans how to survive and thrive in the harsh environment. Jake was officially promoted to the position of Interspecies Liaison Officer. His new job was to continue building the relationship between humans and Therians. Dr. Amy Sullivan was assigned to establish a permanent research station where both species could work together. Luna and her family became the first official Therian ambassadors. They learned to live comfortably around human technology while teaching other Therians that cooperation was possible. Scout became particularly skilled at operating human equipment. Frost developed an amazing ability to translate between human speech and Therian language. Ember became the social coordinator, helping new Therians feel comfortable around humans. The 3 young Therians grew into healthy adults who were equally at home in both worlds. They had learned human problem-solving methods and Therian survival skills. They could use tools, understand complex instructions, and even help with scientific research. 1 year after the storm, Jake stood outside his expanded station and watched a group of young humans and young Therians playing together in the snow. The sight would have been impossible to imagine when he first arrived on this frozen world. Luna approached him, now a grandmother to a new generation of pups who had never known a world without human friends. She made the soft sound that Jake had learned meant contentment and placed her large head against his shoulder. "You are welcome, old friend," Jake said, understanding that no translation was needed. The desperate act of one mother bringing her frozen babies to a stranger had become something much larger. It had become proof that intelligence, compassion, and trust could bridge any gap between different forms of life. On Kepler 442b, 2 species had learned to share a world, and both were stronger because of it. The frozen moon that had once seemed like humanity's lonely outpost had become something much better. It had become home to the galaxy's first true partnership between intelligent species, built on the foundation of a mother's love and a human's willingness to help those in need.